One of the biggest problems that everyone faces when switching to Linux is choosing the right distribution. Even if you've been using Linux for quite a while, you've probably been thinking about other distributions and if they're better or worse than the one you're currently using. Today we're gonna have a look at two big families of distributions, Ubuntu and Arch. We're gonna compare them and see their differences. So with no further ado, let's get into it. Now, first of all, I'm talking about families of distributions because both Ubuntu and Arch have a lot of derivates. But each and every one of them is completely identical for the most part, and for the part we're interested in, to the base distribution. Now, the big thing about Ubuntu is that the installation is very easy. Thanks to the graphical installer Ubiquiti, installing Ubuntu is as easy as just flashing the ISO to a USB thumb drive and booting it on your computer. And the great thing is that all different flavors of Ubuntu have the same installer. So if you're looking at Vanilla Ubuntu or Ubuntu Mate or Linux Mint or Elementary OS or any other derivative of Ubuntu, it's always the same. The installation is always managed by Ubiquiti. One of the big points in favor for Ubuntu is that the installation works offline, since everything that needs to be installed is contained in the ISO. On the other side, installing Arch is no easy task. Arch by default comes with no installer at all. It means that once you boot the ISO, all you have is a command line, and you have to go to the wiki and follow the guide to install Arch yourself piece by piece. Moreover, differently from Ubuntu, Arch installation requires a working internet connection since everything has to be pulled from the internet. Now, all these problems are related to vanilla Arch, because most Arch derivates come with a graphical installer. For example, Antergos comes with the graphical installer Kinky. Then other distributions like Manjaro and Apricity OS come with another installer called Calamares. Now they're both really easy to use and very similar to Ubiquiti, but there are two differences between those two installers. Kinky, as vanilla Arch, only works online, since, as vanilla Arch again, it pulls everything from the internet, while Calamares works fine offline since everything that needs to be installed is on the ISO, just like Ubuntu. Now let's move to package management and software installation. Ubuntu, since it's based on Debian, uses Debian Package Manager, APT. Now the thing about APT is that you have multiple front ends that you can use. The most important ones are probably apt-get, aptitude, and dpkg. Now on Ubuntu you want to use apt for installing from the repositories and dpkg to install deb files for software that is not available right away on your repositories like Google Chrome, Steam, and Skype. About repositories, Ubuntu's repos are really well populated and you will find most of the software you need in the official repositories. But in case you need a different version of a package that comes in Ubuntu, or if you need a package that is not available in Ubuntu and you don't want to use a deb file, you can use PPAs. PPAs are just third-party repositories that are added to your system so that you can pull software from them just as if you were pulling them from the official repos. Now, PPAs are great in theory, but they're not so good in real life, especially when you're using multiple of them. What happens is that different PPAs may provide the same package, and this may cause conflicts in your system and damage it to the point that it's not even able to boot. And this happened to me many times. One other big problem with Ubuntu packaging is that the included software is really old. I mean, it's not as old as Debian Stable, of course, but it's still pretty old. For instance, we're currently at version 3.20 of GTK and the GNOME desktop and all the connected applications like Nautilus and gedit and so on. But Ubuntu 16.04 ships with GTK 3.18 and GNOME 3.18. But some other applications, for some reason like Nautilus, ship at older versions. Again, Nautilus for example ships at version 3.14, which doesn't really make any sense to me. But this also happens for other kinds of software, for instance KDN Live, which is a fast evolving software, and I personally need every single update and fix for that particular software. Again, you can use a PPA, but the problems are still there. Even the kernel is shipped with an older version. And this may be a problem mostly if you're using new hardware like Skylake CPUs or the new AMD RX 480, 470 and 460 graphics cards. And talking about graphics cards, one other thing that's outdated is NVIDIA drivers. And this is also a big bummer to me because every single release of the NVIDIA driver makes the performance better and makes the graphics card work better with your system. Again, you can use a PPA to update your kernel or your graphics drivers, but it's not really recommended since fiddling with delicate software like the kernel or drivers may cause instabilities in your system. I mean, it may work for some time, but in the long run, it will be a problem. In Arch, the package manager is called Backman. Functionality-wise, it's not quite on par with APT, but all the functions that a normal user would want to use are there. Now, the syntax of Backman is a bit weird, especially for someone coming from Ubuntu or Debian. For instance, for installing software in Ubuntu, you have apt install, while on Arch you have Backman-S. To update your software on Ubuntu, you have apt update and apt upgrade, while on Arch you have Backman-SYU. To remove software, on Ubuntu you have apt remove or apt purge, while in Arch you have Backman-RS. Now, this doesn't really make Backman more difficult, it's just that the syntax is a little more difficult to remember. Arch repositories are a little bit less populated than Ubuntu ones, but this is not really a problem. Now, similarly to how Ubuntu uses PPAs to add external software and third-party repositories to your system, Arch has one thing called AUR, or Arch User Repository. The Arch User Repository, as the name says, is a big, massive, ginormous repository maintained by the community. It contains basically any package that you may possibly want to use. Now, in AUR, not every package works fine, but most of the packages work no problem. One other difference with PPAs is that AUR packages are not precompiled. Instead, AUR just contains things called package builds, which are basically similar to makefiles. Anyway, they offer an automated way to compile a package for Arch and install it right away on your system. So it's really not a big effort for a normal user. It may take a little bit longer, especially if you're running with a slower CPU, but for most things, it will work just fine. Now, the best way to use AUR is using an helper, and probably the most popular one right now is Yort. It's an easy tool where you just write Yort and some keywords or the package name that you want to install, and then the terminal outputs the results of your search and you just choose which package to install, and it's really easy and straightforward, and I really like it. Now, about the package versions, Arch is considered to be one of the most bleeding edge distributions out there. This means that every package is at its latest version. As soon as a new version of a certain package comes out, you have it right away on your system. One other important thing about package management is using graphical package managers. And probably the best one is Synaptic. It's an old piece of software, I assure you. It's been there probably since APT existed, but it's still really valid, and if I ever need to use a graphical package manager in Ubuntu, Synaptic is what I'm going for. It's really well built and reliable, and it feels just as reliable as using the command line. And it's also simple to use for more inexperienced users, but advanced enough for power users. Now, Ubuntu official graphical package manager right now is GNOME Software. It used to be their own software center, but since Ubuntu 16.04, they switched to GNOME Software. I can tell you, GNOME Software is not really the best graphical package manager out there, but it works fine for the most part, and it's really easy to use for new users. While GNOME Software is aesthetically superior to something like Synaptic, I mean, Synaptic is an old software, really old software, and its looks are kind of dated, it doesn't offer the same functionality nor the same reliability that Synaptic offers. Now, on the other side of things, on Arch, you have quite a choice for graphical package managers. The most important ones are probably Pamac, Octopi, and Pacman XG. Now, those are really similar to Synaptic functionality-wise and look-wise, since they probably got the inspiration from Synaptic, but they're not quite as reliable as Synaptic is on Ubuntu. Let me explain this to you. Now, every time you have to do anything related to package management in Arch, so I'm talking about updating repositories, installing, removing, or updating software, before you do that, a lock is put on Backman database, so that one process and only one process can use it at the same time. Now, after everything is done, the lock from Backman database is removed. Now, what happens with graphical package managers is that since they tend to automatically update your repositories to see if there are any software updates available, what happens is that if the repositories are updating, and at the same time you're doing some weird actions like shutting down your system or putting it to sleep in standby mode, the operation is forcibly interrupted and the log file is not removed. This means that anytime you have to do another package management action like installing, removing, or updating your software again, you have to manually remove the log file yourself. And this is really annoying. I know it doesn't feel like it's a likely thing to happen, but I assure you I tried many graphical package managers and it happens a lot with all of them. In Arch you can also use GNOME software, so the same graphical package manager that you use on Ubuntu, since GNOME software wasn't really built around Ubuntu, instead it was built to be cross-platform. Let's now talk about release models. Now, Ubuntu uses a version release model. This means that every 6 months a new version of Ubuntu comes out. So we have 15.04, 15.10, 16.04, and soon in October 16.10. Now, this is a classic approach for operating systems, but it's not the best one, at least in my opinion. Having versions of your operating system means that most packages are frozen for the release. This means that, for instance, if Ubuntu 16.04 ships with GTK 3.18, it won't receive GTK 3.20 or 3.22 anytime. It will keep using old versions even if new ones come out. And the same thing goes for most of the packages, including the kernel. And this is particularly unfortunate since you may have problems with newer hardware, like for instance Skylake CPUs and the new AMD RX graphics cards. On the other hand, Arch follows a rolling release model. This means that Arch does not have any versions. When you think of it, this actually makes a lot of sense, since a Linux distribution is not one single piece of software. Instead, it's the composition of multiple single pieces like the kernel, the GNU core utilities, the desktop environment, and the applications you use every day. There's almost nothing that is specific to a distribution. The package manager and some other kind of softwares may be exceptions, but everything else is or should be the same for all distributions. The rolling release model means that you never have to upgrade to the next version, because there simply is no next version. There's just the current version, which is the one you're using. So if any application is updated, so for instance your terminal emulator, your kernel, your drivers, your desktop environment, or your favorite text editor, you just update your system like you would normally do, and boom, you're done. You have the latest software. Let's talk now of something a little more on the professional/business side of things. Reliability and maintenance. Maintaining Ubuntu is really an easy task. You just have sporadic updates, and if you're using an LTS release, you're all set to go for at least 5 years. This is really important when you have a Linux system to power something like an office PC or a server or a kiosk, where you have to do the least amount of work to keep them running. You don't have time for big updates that could potentially break your system. You just have to set it up and let it run for as long as possible and with minimal effort. Now, this is where a versioned operating system makes sense, and this is where using Ubuntu is a good choice, at least in my opinion. On the other side of things, the fast-moving nature of Arch as a rolling release makes it more time-consuming to maintain. On an Arch machine, you can have updates every other day, and the package versions are not frozen to a stable version, but instead they're following the current upstream version. Imagine having an office with at least 20 Arch machines. How much time would it require to maintain every single one of them and ensure that they all work after every update? Now, think of hundreds or maybe thousands of Arch machines. How could you possibly have the time or the money to maintain all of them? Using Arch for such big scale networks is not an option. You simply can't rely on a moving target like Arch for these kind of tasks. Now, as you see, both Arch and Ubuntu have their pros and their cons. I hope this video was helpful to you to decide which distribution is best for you. I know there are a lot more distributions out there, but I think Ubuntu and Arch are the most popular ones right now. So if you're wondering what's the big difference between the two of them, there you have it. So guys, this is gonna wrap up this video. Thank you very much for watching. I really do appreciate it. If you like this video, please press the thumbs up button down there, and also remember to subscribe to my channel if you want more of this. Again guys, thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you in the next one.